We have some more information coming in here. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee now demands unmonitored referendum. Well, UN monitored, I beg your pardon, UN monitored referendum there over CAA. If the BJP has guts, it should go for a referendum. Mamata Banerjee is saying very clearly that here, UN-monitored referendum over CAA. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee says if the BJP has guts, then go through a referendum monitored by the UN. She says it categorically that she will not implement the Citizenship Amendment Bill, neither the NRC in her state, West Bengal. And she says that if the BJP has guts, then go through a UN referendum. Quickly going over to my colleague Arun. Arun, do tell us what's a UN monitored referendum here. Mamata Banerjee daring the BJP to pass this test.
Completely reprehensible kind of a comment coming in from a person of that stature, Nabila. Why do I say that? For the simple reason that this is an internal affair as far as the issue and the people of the country are concerned. This has to be resolved. If it has to be resolved, it has to be resolved by sitting across the table, discussion, or whatever means you want to adopt. To, be so brazen enough to say that you need a UN-based referendum smacks of some kind of... there are no words to describe this kind of approach. On several issues relating to sovereignty and relating to our territorial rights, we have steadfastly said that discussion and dialogue is the way forward. And that
but here, when there is no room for dialogue, when the law has already been passed and people are not being allowed to protest, where is the room for dialogue, Arun?
But Nabila, please understand, this is an internal matter of a state.
It's excluding a certain religion, even though it's internal. There's no room for dialogue here.
It may be right, but to say that you need a UN referendum is unthinkable. No.
Right. What's a UN referendum, Arun? If you can explain to us UN referendum.
Well, basically, the whole thing is that the matter is referred to the UN. The UN then either decides to send a fact-finding team or it puts the matter through to vote. We can't be making a mockery of ourselves by referring something which is internal to a committee of nations. Because by doing so, first of all, we don't know whether the rules permit this to happen. Secondly, by doing so, we are making a mockery of ourselves. On the one hand, we say that we are the world's biggest democracy. And if you don't have space or if you don't have the ability to resolve issues. We've resolved issues. Yes, it has been against certain groups, certain people, but some of the most contentious issues have been resolved. It may not to be the liking of one and all, but these issues have been resolved. The question is, how on earth could a leader of her stature go to this extent by saying that we need a UN referendum? We are not, for heaven's sake, we are not one of those Central European nations which have been, hit by crisis, where there is a humanitarian problem on hand and it requires intervention of international bodies, etc. We are a vibrant democracy. Yes, there may be flaws in it, but at the end of it, we have a functional government at work. And to stoop to this level to say that you need a UN referendum perhaps smacks of some kind of an attitude which is not necessarily very conducive as far as democracy is concerned, Nabila.
Well, Arun, when you call this an internal matter, we're looking at protests across of the globe as well. It's not just Indians protesting in India, it's also Indians protesting across the globe. They're saying that the government of the day isn't listening to them.
Well, there have been several issues which have got highlighted like this. Probably now the matter has reached the courts of law. The courts of law will probably take it up, and they will take a call. I mean, first of all, whether they admit it, and then the question is, once if it is admitted, when is the date of hearing, etc. So there is a process. It's a long drawn process, admittedly true, but it is beyond comprehension for anyone to come and say that on any issue or every issue you need a UN referendum.
Well, this is not any issue and every issue, isn't it, Arun? This is an issue that is burning across of the globe. It's not just Indians in India, like I said, everywhere in the globe, outside the Indian embassy, Indians are standing there vehemently protesting against this act. But let's take a quick listen, Arun. Moving over to KV Dhananjaya, Supreme Court Advocate, joining us on the phone line. Mr. Dhananjaya, do give us some insight as to what a UN referendum is that Mamata Banerjee seems to be hinting at. She says if the BJP has the guts, go through this test. Let's have a UN referendum here that puts this law at test. What's a UN referendum, and why do you think Mamata Banerjee has made this comment?
Well, referendum is nothing but asking the opinion of the people that are affected. Now, Mamata Banerjee, I'm sure, must have been slightly confused about what she wants. But the more important thing is, I think she wants the United Nations to take up this issue. She wants a debate in the United Nations about the legality of the India's Citizenship Amendment Act, the new one, the new version. I think that is justified. If Mamata Banerjee and a lot of other chief ministers were to write to the United Nations Refugee Council, or for that matter, the United Nations Secretary, and request them to take up this matter, then I think the United Nations will be forced to take up this issue, and there will be a debate, a very wide debate in which various members will be able to join, participate in the debate, and that could in fact censure India, because I don't think anybody in the United Nations would welcome. As any country in the world, any other country in the world come forward and lauded India for what it has done, nobody would do it.
Well, Mr. Dhananjaya, would you call this an internal matter which has no involvement of the UN, or should not have an involvement from the UN? It's an internal matter of India, people call this.
How is it an internal matter? We are saying that we want to, provide refuge or citizenship to the depressed or oppressed minorities in other countries. Now, as a matter of principle, we state that. But the next sentence is, wait, what we mean is only the 6. I mean, that's actually ridiculous. You can't do that. Now, the United Nations, to the extent it will take up this matter for debate, and I'm very sure they would in fact want to take this matter for debate when chief ministers of different states will, because they have more at stake here. I can tell you this. Show me one place that says this is India. You will never find anything like that. You will find a place called Bangalore. You will find a place called Kerpuram. Nowhere in India will you find any particular place called India, which means India is the whole of all the territories put together. It is the essence of this country. So when chief ministers, who will eventually bear the brunt of such blatant discrimination, when they come together, when they go to the United Nations, and when they want the United Nations to censure the central government of India, then it's really going to take on an international proportion, because, again, I cannot think of any country in the world that would say India has done the right thing. This is so regressive. This goes back to the 1920s and 30s. This is how Mr. Hitler, started. I mean, he carried on a campaign for a very long time. When he initially started, it looked so very innocuous, and that's how the world missed it. And that's the reason why we have Article 14. The Second World War happened, and we saw what happened to the Jews there. Now, nobody in 1930s could have said this could have happened to the Jews, because nobody, really took note of it. It all starts in a very innocuous manner. Mr. Modi says that the Muslims don't have to be afraid. What nonsense is that? Why should the Muslims not be afraid? The moment he says Muslims don't deserve protection while other communities deserve protection, Muslims have to be shattered. Muslims have to be scared. So you have already said Muslims don't deserve protection in this country. When they are fleeing persecution from our neighboring countries, you've essentially downgraded them. And that's exactly how various other countries where all kinds of genocides have happened, those are the starting steps. And it's only natural for people to be scared. And I can tell you, It's not just the Muslims that must be worried. People like us, we don't want to, think of a country in which we have one higher class of people and the other one is a second and downgraded class of people. For that reason, what Mamata Banerjee, I believe, wants is for the United Nations to take cognizance of it. And when Chief Minister is right, I think that's going to happen. And then if there is going to be an international debate, I can tell you all the countries of the world will heap down on Mr. Modi and Mr. Amit Shah, because these two individuals don't seem to know what they are doing at all. Now, a lot of people might say that, okay, this matter is now in the Supreme Court, so on and so forth. Well, Supreme Court will decide eventually, and I can tell you Supreme Court is bound to decide when they decide that this is blatantly unconstitutional. If for whatever reason the Supreme Court were to say this is constitutional, I can tell you we will have something far worse than Indira Gandhi's emergency. Now, when anybody blames Indira Gandhi for the emergency, they conveniently forget that somebody made that emergency possible, and it was the Supreme Court of India which made that emergency possible. They were the ones that approved Indira Gandhi's emergency, and all the excesses that she committed were excesses which had the blessing of the Supreme Court of India.
Right.
The Supreme Court of India has failed this country once, right? So how would the people trust, okay, the Supreme Court will come to their refuge? And I can understand when people come on the street, when they, start resorting to violence, we have to understand that we have made them insecure, and we are making them insecure day in and day out, and we are telling them not to protest, we are telling them not to do this, not to do that. How does it work? It just can't work that way. We are the central government is the one.
Well, many petitions have been filed in the Supreme Court, Mr. Dhananjaya. The Supreme Court is closed. When is it going to open? Do you believe that the Supreme Court will hear those petitions, and by when?
You see, when 60 different petitions have been filed in the Supreme Court, now the Supreme Court does not find this to be a matter of urgency. Some other person files a petition. He wants the central government to publicize about this law. And the Supreme Court says, why don't you publicize about this law? Now, if this law is going to be struck down, and which we all expect it will be struck down, what's the point of this publicity? Sometimes the Supreme Court just can't be understood at all. But then those who do, in fact, read about the Supreme Court over the last 50 and 70 years will find that the Supreme Court, again, is not infallible. They do make mistakes, and they did it. Anything and everything that you would want to blame Srimati Indira Gandhi for is also something you can attribute to our Supreme Court of India, 28th April 1976. That's the day when they said, by reversing 9 different high courts that had struck down or diluted Indira Gandhi's emergency by saying Indira Gandhi's emergency measure is all fine, it's legal, it's constitutional, she can do whatever she wants. And she did everything that she wanted over the next 2 years. So people can't just be assured because we have one Supreme Court that will decide when, 22nd of January. This is a matter that's craving for urgency, and yet the Supreme Court of India says we will deal with it on the 22nd of January. And then today, I believe the Delhi High Court, which was hearing how the students were all being, the Jamia Millia Islamia, the student issue, they say, okay, we are issuing notice, let this matter come up on sometime on the 4th of February. Look, courts have to come to the protection of people right away. I mean, even in ordinary property disputes, court would say, I would like to hear the government in the next week. How is it when personal liberties are involved? Courts are saying, okay, we will hear you next month, we will hear you month after the next. It doesn't work that way. And people are insecure. People are feeling really very insecure, and that is why they are coming onto the street. We haven't seen anything like this in the last 12, 15 years, and we have our Chief Minister saying that someone is sponsoring it. You think the Congress party can really bring these many people on the ground? They can't. No political party can bring this groundswell of anger. There is a groundswell of anger all over the country, and no political party is capable of achieving that. It's happening because people are coming onto the streets themselves, and people know about history. And Mr. Ramchandra Guha, by the way, I saw those images on TV, and I can tell you it was so disturbing. If we don't get to know about our history, we are nobody. And therefore, we should always respect our historians. Mr. Ramchandra Guha is a very eminent historian, and more so on the history of Mohandas Gandhi, our Mahatma Gandhi. So how did we deal with him today in the morning? And we have a police commissioner. I don't know what kind of instruction he's given. And all I want to tell your viewers on air is this. Some people have already filed petitions in the Karnataka High Court asking to the court to strike down the statewide imposition of 144. Now, if somebody would like to file a petition which would say that the DGP of Karnataka should be censured, the Bangalore Police Commissioner should be censured, I am offering to argue that matter freely because that would be my duty and my contribution to the public. Somebody I request should file a petition. Someone that's been affected to file a petition that will say that DGP of Karnataka ought to be questioned by the High Court, the Police Commissioner ought to be questioned. The BJP party might want a statewide imposition of 144, but that's no business of the DGP, that's no business of the Police Commissioner to adopt. They have to exercise their mind independently. This is not the British time. This is not the time when we didn't have a constitution. We had absolute rule during the British time. Whatever they would tell their police officers to do, the police officers would do. We don't follow that system at all. We follow a system of law where the police must have regard to the law. If the Chief Minister or the Home Minister or even the Central Home Minister were to call upon the Karnataka DGP and say, do this and do that, we expect the Karnataka DGP to say, sir, it's just not done. You can't impose a statewide emergency or 144 in this manner. It has to be situational. And, it's important for people, therefore, to request the High Court of Karnataka to take the Karnataka DGP to task. But it so happens that I don't believe anyone has filed it. I'm therefore urging our viewers, somebody please come forward, file it, and I will come and argue, and I have to do this. That's all.
Well, Mr. Dhananjaya, here we're looking at several states not willing to impose the NRC and the CAA. How do you think that's going to work? Some states, the BJP-run states, are going to impose it while the others are not going to impose it. What do you think is going to happen on that front with this sort of, reactions coming in from different state leaders?
As a matter of law, under Articles 256 and Article 257, it is not open to any state government to defy a central law.
Yeah.
Therefore, if any chief minister would in fact, because this new amendment that has come into effect would require a new set of rules. Previous versions of the Citizenship Act was such that it could have been implemented just by the central cadre public servants. You take the Income Tax Act. It is implemented across the country by the central cadre public servants only. State cadre public servants barely have anything to do with it. Now, the new variation of the Citizenship Act is such that new rules will be framed, and under these new rules, massive responsibilities will be cast on various state cadre public servants. Now, if any chief minister were to issue an instruction, whether orally or in writing, to any state cadre public servant saying that please defy the central law, do not follow it, then that becomes a ground for the governor of the state to step in, and he would be required to warn the chief minister and ask the chief minister to withdraw that defiance. If the chief minister persists and does not withdraw the instruction and continues to defy, then the chief minister's government could be dismissed and central rule invoked. That's a matter of law. When I say matter of law, what I mean to say is, just 2 minutes ago, I was saying to you that this is a really very bad law. But then I have to still tell you, in terms of the Constitution, if any state chief minister says they will not follow this new Citizenship Amendment Act, the governor could readily dismiss that government and bring in president's rule. That's the law. Right. And law is what it is. A lot of lawyers are telling you that no, chief ministers can do this, chief ministers can do that. No, they can't do this, they can't do that. They have to strictly abide by the central law. Absolutely. Our Constitution is structured in such a way.
Mr. Dhananjaya, thank you very much for bringing us those details. A very clear-cut, comprehensive explanation given by Mr. Dhananjaya, a Supreme Court advocate, who tells us that there's no way the state governments can refuse in implementing this law. It's now an act; it's got to be implemented. And but of course, there is room for debate. There is room for petitions to be filed. The Supreme Court's got to take it up and address the issue. It is an issue that needs attention. The need of the hour is attention to these protests with immediate effect.